Railroads. They've been an integral part of the United States for nearly 200 years. And since their meager beginnings, they have hauled millions of people, billions of tons of freight and merchandise. And they continue to be a major player in the movement of freight merchandise across the country today. But railroads have become sterile, and it's not anything of their fault. It's just that as railroads need to improve and compete, they discard some of their older equipment. And some of that older equipment winds up at wonderful places like this. Hi, my name is Dave Parrott, and I'm with the Audio and Video Technology Department of Mount San Jacinto College. And on this edition of Inland Treasures, we're going to be visiting a couple of places whose goal is to preserve railroads past, to preserve that feel of railroad, the equipment, the sights, the sounds, the romance that is the love of trains. Our visit to the Orange Empire Railway Museum started off with a brisk walk down Broadway Street, and then up to the Pinacati Station, where Jim was waiting to introduce us to one of the many historic trolleys owned by the museum.
Welcome aboard.
Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Great.
Good, good. How old is this? Because it looks like a pretty old vehicle.
This trolley was built in 1921. It was taken out of service in 1955.
Oh my gosh.
And it was sold to the city of Inglewood, who located it in one of their parks.
These are not diesel. These are electric.
These are electric. They run on 600 volts DC, and they pick up their voltage off the overhead wire. There's a substation that feeds the wire.
So there's a station that transforms the electricity that most of the public gets, and it transforms it into this 600 volts DC so that you can. And did that come from like the Los Angeles Railway or the Pacific Electric also?
We have one station that did come from the Los Angeles system, and the newer system, which is over here in Cottonwood someplace, or outside of Barn 6 over there. That one is a electronic converter, whereas the one from the Los Angeles is a rotary generator. And when they fire that off, it looks like something from Frankenstein movie or something. There's sparks flying all over.
Oh my gosh! So, can you take us for a ride?
Sure.
All right, let's go for a ride. The route the trolleys follow is a loop that wraps around the original 10 acres set up by the founders of the museum back in 1958. Along our ride, Jim stopped the trolley and spoke about the history of the museum. In fact, we learned there are over 200 pieces of railroad and trolley equipment, many of those having been lovingly restored to their original grandeur just as though they rolled off the assembly line. The entire ride lasts about 15 minutes and is an absolute pleasure to be part of. But just as we are about to exit the trolley, we were introduced to two more members of the museum, one of which has a very unique title. Hi guys.
Morning.
You are?
Rick.
Rick.
Mm-hmm.
And?
Bryce.
Bryce. And Bryce is one of the younger members, yeah?
He is quite young.
The youngest operator.
The youngest operator in the trolley museum here. And you run the trolleys.
Yes.
Yes.
How long did it take you to learn that? When did you start?
Well, there's some classes you have to go through. There's 3 classes, 2 tests, and then you can start operating with a pilot and stuff, and then you get signed off on certain cars, and that's pretty much how it works.
And how long have you liked trains?
ever since I was probably 4 years old watching Thomas the Tank Engine.
Thomas started it up.
It's funny, we're born with it. I
Yeah.
love trains, and so people ask me, "Oh, how long have you liked trains?" Since I was born.
Yep.
I was born with it. I call it my genetic defect, and it's a good one.
It's a good one. That's
Yeah.
right.
So you wanna can you run the trolley for us and
Yeah.
take it for a ride?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. While we were on our ride with Bryce, we passed by a large barn-like building, so we asked about it. We were told that is engine house number 6, where the Grizzly Flats Railroad collection is displayed, which was donated to the museum by Ward Kimball. When we entered the building, we were amazed to find a large collection of narrow-gauge locomotives, cars, and railroad equipment. And eventually, we ended up speaking with John, the curator for the collection, and asked him how all this came to the museum. Tell us a little bit about the Chloe, because that is just such an adorable little locomotive.
Chloe was a Hawaiian locomotive, number 2 on the Waimanolo Sugar Company in Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands.
Bless you.
Yes. It was one of 2 locomotives that was out of service from sugar harvesting in the late 1940s. Trucks surplus from World War II had replaced rail harvesting of sugar in the islands. And Gerald Best, who was a friend of Ward's and had helped him acquire this and some of the other cars and equipment, found them. They purchased them and moved them to Ward's backyard. They did a rebuild of both locomotives intermittently so that they both were operating. And Ward liked the appearance of this variety of Baldwin locomotive, so he took a slightly different Baldwin locomotive and recreated it into this version, named it after his daughter, Chloe.
There's no better sound that typifies the romance of railroading than that of a steam locomotive in operation. And on select weekends during the fall, winter, and spring months, Orange Empire Railway Museum fires up their old number 2, couples it up to a passenger train, and fills the area with the wonderful sounds of a living, breathing steam locomotive. On this day, we were honored to be invited into the cab and speak with some of the folks who keep this grand old steamer alive and well. The first person we met was Jeff, the crew foreman, and I asked him to give us a little history about old number 2. Hi everybody, we're inside the Orange Empire Railway Museum's Ventura County number 2, a steam locomotive. And we're going to interview a couple of the folks that take care of this steam locomotive and make sure that it runs and operates well without any problems, which is kind of tough because this thing is a relatively old locomotive. So I'm standing with Jeff. Jeff, howdy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And Jeff you're the lead, the engineer of the steam program, yes?
Yeah, I'm called the crew foreman out here.
The crew foreman, all right. Can you tell us a little history about this locomotive?
Yeah, Ventura County number 2 was originally built as Cascade Timber Company number 107. It worked out of Reliance, Washington. It was built in 1922 as a logging locomotive. It became Ventura County number 2 sometime in the early 1940s when it was transported down to Ventura County to serve Port Hueneme during World War II and the expansion of traffic that happened there. It worked for the Ventura County Railway in main service throughout the 40s and then limited service in the 50s and some fan trip service in the 1950s and into the early 60s when Orange Empire acquired it.
And speaking of keeping a steam engine running, there are always 2 people inside the cab when the steam locomotive is in operation, the engineer and the fireman. So we spoke with Justin, the fireman of number 2, to find out just how does someone fire a steam locomotive. So Justin, how do you fire a steam locomotive?
Well, that's sort of an interesting question. This engine is kind of unique in that it does not burn coal, so you can imagine like in the movies, firemen would be shoveling coal all day. This is an oil burner, which is actually very common in California, even historically. So instead of shoveling coal, I have all these valves I have to deal with. One of them feeds oil into the firebox. The other feeds steam, which basically turns that oil into a fine mist and creates a big torch flame. It's really cool.
So, and that obviously then creates the heat for the steam, and how much pressure does this locomotive generally tend to operate at?
We typically run around 155, 160 psi.
That's pretty good, because the model steam locomotives that we're going to be going and seeing next are generally about 120 to 135. So it's a funny that even the small ones run at pretty high pressures.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So then, same question that I asked Dan Parks, the engineer. How long did it take you to become the fireman?
Well, fireman is actually one of the steps to becoming an engineer, at least on the steam crew. I've been volunteering for about 5 years, and so they put me in the fireman seat about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So I've been doing this for 2 or 3 years.
All right. Well, as you can see, the Orange Empire Railway Museum is truly a fantastic place for anybody to come to, whether you're a hardcore rail fan, or maybe just someone looking for a unique day out, or how about a family going out for a picnic and riding the trains. Either way, it really is a great place to come visit. Now, this next place that we're going to go visit dives even deeper into the love of trains, or should I say dives even smaller into the love of trains. Either way, you're absolutely going to love this next group and how they're working to preserve railroads past.
The Orange Empire Railway Museum is a 501c nonprofit organization that operates 363 days a year. Their hours of operation are 9:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, and from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock on the weekends. There's no cost for parking and no cost to enter the museum's property. The museum recommends that you come on the weekends simply because this is when their passenger trains and trolleys operate. Plus, most of their display buildings will be open too. The cost to ride the trains all day is $12 for ages 12 and up, $8 for ages 5 through 11, and children ages 4 and under are free. There is also a discounted rate of $40 which is available for families, which is 2 adults and all of their children. For directions to the museum, simply log on to their website at www.oerm.org and click on the info button at the top of their page. Or you can simply call them at 951-943-3020.